كمان ما ينفعش تستجيب للمفعول. Hello.
Hey, Eric, how are you?
I'm good. Hello, Andrea.
Yeah, hello, Andrea. I'm not sure if you tried to say something, but we didn't hear you.
Hello?
Hello, Ben.
Hey, how you guys doing?
Doing well, thanks. How about you?
Yeah, not too shabby.
Andrea, I'm not sure if you're saying anything. You seem to be unmuted, but I cannot hear anything. Zoom seems to be indicating that you're sending audio, but I still can't hear anything. I actually cannot hear anyone. Maybe you can hear each other.
Yeah, I can hear you guys.
I can hear you. You as well, Tarek.
I can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay, then it's just Andrea that we cannot hear. Sure.
I cannot hear everything.
Hello.
Hello, Emil.
Sorry for being late.
Hello,
No, it's
hello.
fine. We've been messing with Andreas' audio, or Andrea has been messing with his audio. The rest of us are just watching, I guess.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you, Andrea.
Okay, I don't know what happened with my headphones. Sorry about that. So welcome everyone, and sorry about the delay. So hopefully I'm sharing the notes, the agenda for today. So
Yep.
for today's CDEvents, vocabulary discussion meeting notes, August 23rd, and feel free to add yourself to the participant list. Yeah, we have a few updates on the agenda. If there is anything more that you would like to discuss, feel free to add it as we go.
Yeah, I added a bullet in the end on the Python SDK.
Cool, thanks. The first item I had in the agenda, I put it first, but feel free, Emil, to move it if you'd like, prefer. It's about migrate content from CDEvents to CDEvents. So we have some content today under the CDEvents repo in the CDF org, and then we have a CDEvents org, and there are still things to be moved across, and Emil has been working on that. So I was wondering if you would like to give an update on.
Yeah, I could, but maybe I'm not sure if that's really the highest important thing to talk about today on this meeting. I think we should focus on the vocabulary issues here now. If there is time in the end, we can look into that because it's mostly admin stuff and moving things around.
Okay.
So let's keep that on the SIG meeting, or if we have time on this meeting in the end, we can go into it.
Okay. Then I get started with the Go SDK updates. So I've added some more updates to the SDK. We have now task run, pipeline run, and change events that are complete for it's matching the spec. And I also added all the other events, but I'm working on getting them up to date with the spec. So adding any extra field that they might have. A lot of them don't have extra fields, so probably it's going to be not so much work to finish, but still there's something to be done. I also added support for, this is in progress, there is a PR for creating JSON schemas from the Go types. And I'm working on supporting validation of CDEvents in the SDK through the JSON schema. So I'm facing a small issue right now on that, or at least I haven't understood how to do it properly yet. But yeah, so that would be the last bit. Once I solve that, we would be able to basically, yeah, so when we create CDEvents on the SDK, before sending them as cloud events, we could call a validate method, and we would check them against the schema and make sure that any mandatory field is there, basically. If anyone is interested, this is the PR where I added this. And so I started in some of the schemas here. And where is the, yeah. So every event has a get schema method now that was added. And then that is used in the binding to implement this validate method. And this is called basically when creating cloud events. And I added the test coverage for that. There's only one last issue that I need to sort out, and then this will be ready. So if you want to, if anyone is interested, I would like to have a look at the PR or give any comments. Welcome.
So I have a curiosity with the schema, right? Like this seems like it'd be useful across all the SDKs. I'm assuming like that is probably going to be something in the future. Mostly because when I think of validation, right, the biggest issue is when you have multiple SDKs and, you know, a required field gets added or removed, right? How do you update all SDKs easily, right? And I think the schema would probably do it. So is that kind of the idea here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually kind of use the SDK to generate the schemas to get started on those. But I have a PR app, which is in the next update to put those schemas in the spec repo, so that then every SDK can use them. It was just convenient from the goal structs to generate the schema rather than forging them by hand or writing them by hand. But yeah, so the idea long term would be to every time we do a change in the spec, update the schema in the spec, and then we can update all the SDKs from there. Definitely, that would be
Nice. Okay. And then out of curiosity, is the validation, because I know you said something with validation, is validation only ever going to be just required fields and invalid JSON basically?
For now, that's what I added. But yeah, so we can add more. I think I need to investigate a little bit more on what it supported. Basically, the library was using for that kind of matches the JSON schema to the JSON tags that are added in the Golang struct. And I think it should be possible to have more information there than only existing or not mandatory or non-mandatory. So,
it's possible to note in the schema, in JSON schema, if it's allowed to have additional fields or not in each of the objects in the schema. And we need to set or decide on that if we actually will allow custom fields in all of our objects, so to say, or not. Because if we, one obvious drawback is if we allow custom data, custom fields in these objects, and when we all of a sudden want to standardize one of those fields, our users might come into trouble if they have reused or used the exact same names themselves in their variants then of their events. So there are some drawbacks with allowing extension of schema in all its objects. Yeah, but we need to look into that later on.
Yeah, my idea here was to actually do not allow anything extra in the context and in the subject, but to allow to have like this data field that would be at the same level as subject and context,
right? And
to basically allow for like free-form content in there.
Exactly. So that's exactly how we've done it in the Eiffel protocol. So there we have something, a struct called the custom data on the top level, in which the users can provide whatever they want. But if they then want to standardize one of the fields that they use there, then those fields will be moved into that we call the subject or predicate parts or whatever, the standardized part of the schema. So that's a good option actually.
Okay. Yeah, I think I created an issue to clarify these, and I added it to the roadmap. So I'll get to it in a moment. So I can add this your input in there as well. Okay. Yeah. Anything else on the SDK? Any other question? Or all right.
Nothing for me.
Yeah, just other updates on the specification itself. The PR with the formatting changes are merged and live now. So just to show how it looks now for all the events, and we have an initial description for the kind of the stage with the bucket. then the list of the subjects with some details about possible fields. And then we have the list of events. So events one by one, and each event has the list of the fields that are either mandatory or optional for that event with examples. And so this is now done across the entire spec. Yeah, it's mostly a formatting change, but yeah, it's also there were some places before where it wasn't clear where certain fields apply to which event, and hopefully this make it more clear exactly which field we expect in which event. All right, as discussed, I removed the part for the binary mode in CDEvents. And the next thing would be also, I created an issue to track the data field to be added. That's what we were just discussing. And from what you said, Emil, sounds like you agree on that. Sorry, I just realized, Tarek, that you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I just have a question. Since you showed the required fields and the field, could you back to this page? The field for required fields.
You mean the schema page, right?
Yeah, yeah. My question is it is just kind of documentation till now. It's already written as a code in Go version or some other version.
Well, I guess this is the schema from which both the Go SDK and the Python SDK should be based. So this is not related to the Go SDK specifically. This is the event specification.
Yeah, so my question, since I didn't see it in the Go version, which is I translated from to the Python version, that's why I'm asking: is it something already implemented new, or it's not implemented yet?
So I think based on what Andrea said before, there is a PR that has a lot of this stuff, but it's not guaranteed to be a one-to-one match with a spec for all events. But for most, it should be in that PR that is linked in the HackMD notes. That's right, Andrea, right?
Yes. Also, I believe, Tarek, you worked. You created the Python SDK based on the original Go SDK.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that Mauricio enforced the required versus optional fields in that version of the SDK. But that's what I definitely want to do in the new SDK.
Okay. So my other question: have you changed any fields in any fields or any type in the elements? Like, is it the same fields still exist, or there is changes in the field? Like the schema has been changed regardless of the mandatory stuff, but the schema is still.
Yeah. So the format of the event has changed according to what we discussed in the past working groups. So we agreed on this format where we have this JSON format. Let me see if it loads. Yeah, this needs to fix this rendering, but in which we have where we have a context and subject, root elements, and then the other elements are distributed like this. I mean, the actual content is the same. I don't think we have added or removed any specific field from the different events. But we have kind of changed, defined at least the structure. Before it wasn't defined at all. So when Mauricio created the initial SDK, it used some cloud events extensions, I believe, for some of the fields. And not for some others. So I don't believe the original SDK is it's completely consistent on that. But the new SDK will generate this exact JSON as I'm showing here, and that should be the format for all SDKs eventually. But because the new Go SDK did not exist at the time, I think I understand that the Java and the Python SDK have been created following what was in the original Go SDK as a starting point, but we should converge on what is in the spec.
Okay, okay, understand you now. Okay, great.
Great, thanks. Thanks for the question. Great question, by the way. So I don't know if we need to have extra items, issues on the Python and Java SDK repos to track the work of aligning to the new format of the spec.
I would say since the Python SDK is still in a draft stage, we will just bring that in with the current work.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, the last update I have for the spec, I created a PR where I started adding the JSON schemas that are produced through the for the SDK. So there's change events, pipeline run event, and task run events. And I plan to continue producing the other ones as they are ready, and then adding them to the spec if this works. The ID that I've been using is the domain that we own /draft /schema /change abandoned event, so the name of the event. And eventually we'll need a way to publish those schemas to that domain so that we so that this URL is actually can be pulled. But that's not the case yet. Yeah, so that's it. I think we need to add eventually also to the SDK the ability to fill in the cloud events data schema field. But yeah, so let me know what you think about adding the schemas here in the spec. If you have any concern, or if I can continue to produce them and add them in here.
I think just spontaneously it looks good. I will review it as well, but I think we lack a version property in here probably, since the schema will probably change with versions of the CDEvents protocol. Of course, we have the version for the actual event there, but
Is the date not the version in this case?
Well, the date is not fixed here. I mean, if we add things to the schema in a new version, it will not, the schema will not be, well, of course the schema will differ, but we won't see what version of the spec it belongs to unless we have the schema version in here.
I'm thinking about the draft component of the ID.
Right.
That yeah, that would be a version, I guess. So if we actually release a version, we would replace that draft with an actual version tag or something like that.
I would expect something like that, yeah.
Yeah, there would be, I mean, the Git version, so the Git tag. But of course, if you take the schema out of Git and look at it in isolation, so outside of Git, you would not have that tag information anymore. So maybe, yeah, maybe it makes sense to add the version.
I think it kind of does. I mean, if you would move this out, as you said, to somewhere else, to a schema registry, for example, that you would use for validation or whatever purpose, then you would need somehow to see within the schema what version it belongs to, I think. That could be improved later on, so we don't need to, I don't think we need to add it today, but we should be aware of it.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Version.
Schema.org, which has a bunch of schemas. I don't know if they have a version in there. This is kind of like how I was thinking of like following this pattern, but if you guys see a version, let me know. But I was thinking doing something similar to what they did, what they do.
Okay, so this is yeah, a rendered version. Okay.
If they don't have a version, doesn't that break down immediately? Like after you have released a new version, but before everyone, absolutely everyone, has migrated to the new version?
Yeah, I don't know how they handle that, to be honest. And that's why I was thinking we might not need it, but like it just depends. Maybe, oh wait, maybe their release page. Okay, so that's how it works. Okay, they do have a version. So if you go to the releases, they actually have like the version there, but whatever you see on the website is always latest, basically.
I see.
So yeah, we definitely need a version, but maybe following this pattern, I think is really good.
Yeah, if we look in the schema you created there, Andrea, for the JSON schema version, well, there's actually a version there saying draft 2020-12. That's kind of a version for the JSON schema itself.
Yes.
Or we have something
yes.
similar for our sub C schemas, let's say.
Yeah, so that's why I added it into the in the ID, which is kind of I was following that pattern. But if there is a version property as part of the JSON schema itself, I'd be happy to add it, because yeah, it would be easier
there
to
is
parse.
a way, more or less how we do it in Eiffel is that in the version field here, say on line 8, you could specify a default field there, add a default value to the version field saying what actual version of this event or spec is it. That's one way to do it, actually.
Yeah, I guess it could even be maybe a fixed value, if it makes sense, or something that if it's a different, like an enum with just a single possible value.
That's exactly how we do it in Eiffel, but there are maybe some drawbacks with that, but well, it works in Eiffel, so that could work here as well. Yeah.
Okay.
So for clarification, I can just paste what it looks like there in Eiffel right now. It's, I think, more or less what you said in the comment there.
Yeah.
I add to the comment in the chat. Right. So that's at least an option.
Nice.
And then just reiterating on my previous comment there on additional fields, if we should allow that or not. I saw that was actually in your schema, rendered schema as well. Additional properties false, it says there, which means that it's not allowed to add more. So in line 24.
Yeah.
So that's good. But you haven't added any custom object here, right? Yet.
Not yet. No.
Yeah.
No. It needs to be defined. I created an issue for that.
Yeah. Good.
No, you can click on the line number, not on the plus, if you need to take the URL. No, the line number.
Yeah,
I mean, on the actual 24, I guess.
Yeah. Right.
This
yeah.
one.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll just forget. So where is it? Okay. actually here. Okay. Okay. So if there are no more questions, just next thing I wanted to give some updates. We reviewed the roadmap last time, and just wanted to give some updates. Actually closed issues marked that were marked as done but not closed, and I think there is some project automation to be set up there. I'll look into that. I removed the proof of concepts from the V10 plan, so they're not in there anymore. But I added some more details to issue 13, which out of context doesn't say much, but it's basically the expand the bucket spec. So I added these 4 issues saying that we need to extend the data model for the change event, for the artifact event, for service and environment events, and define a new incident with name to be defined event for that. So this kind of says that the scope of these, at least for 0.1, is these 4 items. I hope this reflects what we discussed last time. And I also added an extra issue here, which I already mentioned about specifying the data field where we can host custom content, basically. And here we have the free SDK ones. The Java one is marked as done. The Python one is in progress, and the Golang is in progress. I guess for the Java one, we'll have new issues to align to the latest version of the spec. But yeah.
Sorry, what do you mean by Java SDK is done? Like the documentation is done, or the full application is done?
So the work that was in scope for this initial issue, Jalander said, okay, we can close this one. I said, okay, the initial work that was planned for this issue is finished, and we'll track extra work. And in a separate issue, it's just that it's not saying that the Java SDK is fully complete or there's no more work to be done. It's just.
So that Java SDK is currently used for the Spinnaker POC, I believe, which was based on the previous spec version, more or less, and not at all up to date with the current spec that we have right now for 0.1, I think. And that's what will happen in the new Java SDK coming on. But we haven't really said that we need the Java SDK in place for the new spec version before we actually release 0.1, I believe.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So I think we can track this extra work in dedicated items so we can have more visibility. But yeah, we haven't decided that we want to have the Java SDK aligned with the latest spec as a requirement for 0.1, as you said, Emil. So I don't know if we should, we think we should or not. I would be happy with the way things are now for 0.1 at least, and continue working and aligning the SDKs to the latest specification.
We could, of course, check with Jalander, was it, for this one, if he intends to update the Java SDK towards the new protocol version as well. But apart from that, I'm not sure we need to do much more. Because of course we need someone to contribute it.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's all of the updates on the roadmap. Of course, on the schema version, on the schema item as well. Yeah, there is progress, as you've seen. Yeah, I also reviewed the milestone 0.1 to make sure that we don't miss anything from that milestone in this project, as you mentioned, Emil, last time. Yeah, and that's all I had for updates. I don't know if Eric or Tarek want to discuss.
So basically, I'm not saying so much, but first of all, we created a pull request with what we have achieved, and we added a little bit step for not just sending, also start receiving. So we optimized our object to be able to read from HTTP or send an object. So the current objects for events are able to read from HTTP or created from scratch. This is a little update about what we have done. And that's it. We're still lacking of documentation and have the full implementation for the receiver. And the testing for the receiver. The receiver is just a little Flask app, one page, just to receive the data, make sure that the object can translate from HTTP to event object.
Yeah, so based on the feedback from the previous time we presented this, as Tarek said, we've been working on, or Tarek has been working on creating Python classes for every different event that we have, and then making sure we can both create it in a good way with a good user experience, and also that we can parse it from JSON. I think when it comes to adopting this, the context and subject type things, I think me and Tarek and the rest of you, but me and Tarek can start, we need to think a little bit about like what values make sense to set for every event you send, what values make sense to set somewhere in the SDK so that every event that you send gets that value. For instance, maybe something related to source. We could provide a method in the SDK for setting a default value for source, like it would be the application or some context related stuff, so that we don't need to repeat that in every event. And that would simplify things for users, I think, if say that you have a rather complicated application that like can set some of the context in some sort of startup or whatever, so that individual pieces of code further inside the application does not need to know what the context is, because that is made part of all the events by themselves. So yeah, I'm not sure, Andrea, if you've done any thinking in the Go SDK regarding that, but it may be something to think about.
Yeah, actually, I think I've not set any default for the source because I didn't have any great idea on how to just to default.
Yeah, I should clarify. I don't mean default as in every user of the SDK would have the same value. I'm more thinking about like if I am Tecton, for instance, then source will always be something related to, or something in context will be something related to Tecton probably. And it may be that every event that is sent should have the same value for that. And then it might be interesting for users of the SDK to be able to say that for all events that are sent from me in this execution, we should always have this value for this field, so that the individual piece of code that needs to send the event doesn't need to know what the value of that specific field should be. But I shouldn't talk too much now. We need to think about it more and discuss with Tarek more as well. What would be a good user experience for that?
I can just add, I think that the context object that we have on top level is the syntax of it is the same for all event types, as far as I understand right now. So there could be a common function at least, or common method to create the context object. You might need some input there, of course, the event type as an input or something like that, and maybe the source as well then. But the actual method of creating the context JSON object could be a common function.
Yeah, in the Go SDK, there is a interface CDEvent that is basically met by all the specific events. And this interface brings in a few methods that allow to set like the ID, the service, the timestamp, the subject ID. And so this can be done in the same way across all the events, basically. And I think this is similar to what you were saying, Emil. And yeah, so for the Go SDK, what I'm doing, I'm setting the ID and setting the timestamp by default, unless they are already set, but of course they can be overwritten with other values. But yeah, I agree. It would be nice to have a way to kind of give a context and say, okay, this is this application context, and this, yeah, it's basically translated into the event. Okay, cool. Anything else on the Python SDK?
I guess it is a draft PR, so you're free to have a look at it if you want, but we know that there are a bunch of things that need to be fixed, so don't spend too much time looking into it right now.
Okay, so I would say that basically you decide when you want to undraft it or merge it, or if you prefer to merge it and iterate on it, or keep it as a draft PR and iterate on the PR.
I think we will iterate on the PR to start with until we have a full PR, so to say, and then we can ask for a review on that.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, next item on the agenda is spec consideration, subscriber model consideration.
Yeah, so me and my team, as well as a few teams here at Apple, have been talking about CDEvents in general. And one thing that we notice is, because right now you guys kind of have this idea of point to point, like services talking to services, you know, with these like CDEvents. And we don't know if that is going to work kind of like at a good, I don't know, it just seems like, so it didn't seem like it would work for us. But one thing that we were considering is maybe having like subscriber model, like where people subscribe to some sort of event bus, right? And CDEvents get pushed out to these subscribers. And that way, you know, payloads like, you know, the request response lifecycle doesn't need to change at all. And then people can kind of like spin down services, or not spin down services, spin down endpoints, if you will, if they feel like it, and just subscribe to this new CDEvent and then need to do, you know, based off that CDEvent, take the appropriate actions of what they need to do based off the context, right? So I was wondering if that has been considered, what has been kind of like talked about there, because it seems like in the spec and from all the past meetings I've been into, it's only been this point to point from service to service passing these events, and I wonder if this has been thought about at all.
I would say definitely
Yeah,
yes.
actually,
sorry, go ahead, Andrea.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think it's something that we don't discuss very often, but for me, it's definitely part of the spec that I guess the main use case for me for the spec is that a event producer sends it to some sort of message bus or broker or whatever you want to call it, and then don't care about whether anyone wants to receive it or not. Which I think, Ben, is in line with what you're talking about. So producers send to the bus, subscribers can decide whatever they want to subscribe to from the bus and act on that. So yeah, I don't think it's something that we discuss very often, but I would guess that everyone is on board with having a model like that.
Okay, cool. I really... Oh, sorry, Andre.
Yeah, it was me. Just a comment. I think it could add to the confusion if you look at the proof of concept, for example, because there it really looks like there is a point-to-point communication going on, but the actual event that is passed between these services are intended for general consumption. It's just that in the POCs there is a point-to-point communication set up where those events are forwarded. Just for convenience reasons for the proof of concept, more or less, I would say.
Okay, cool. Because that's what I was getting. Like, it was just kind of like this general consumption, and and like you said, based off the examples, it seemed like it was kind of point to point, and that's why I was like wondering, whether or not we can kind of like illustrate in the spec, because like you were saying, Eric, I believe this is going to be the main use case, right? Is he having like the subscriber, publisher, this bus, people subscribe to it. Where's this image? Yeah. So this is exactly. This is what, so is this in the spec at all, or?
So this is the diagram of the POC that we have. And in there we actually use a broker, Cloud Events broker.
Mm-hmm.
So because we send events from one producer, like can be Tecton, Captain, and then we may have multiple listeners. So like Captain is sending an event, and both Tecton and Spinnaker in this case are picking it up.
Mm-hmm.
But also we have like the cloud event here, which is kind of the UI of the demo that is picking up all the events, so that you can show that which events are going through basically. And so that's exactly, I think, the model that you're describing. I mean, we had some discussions in the CDEvents summit. Yeah, actually in Austin, because there are some use cases that were brought up where it could make sense to have more like imperative type of events. So all the events that we have in the spec today, they're meant to be like declarative events. So events that are sent to a bus basically for anyone who wants to listen to them and react to them. But there have been a few requests for like more imperative type of events, saying an event that says start a pipeline or run this build.
But wouldn't that still go to the event bus though?
That could still go to the event bus, and you could have actually multiple people reacting to those kind of events as well. That's true. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if we need that point-to-point use case. I mean, in my opinion, I would try to get rid of that in the docs, because that's how I read it, and I didn't even know you guys even considered this publisher subscriber model as the main use case. But I'm glad that this is the main use case. But I think we need to do a better illustration. Like having this diagram like would have been perfect in the spec, saying, oh, this is kind of how we envision this working. Because like if I saw this, I'd be like, oh, perfect, you know, then we don't have to like discuss this at all, right? You guys are already thinking about it, which you guys are, right? So which is really good to hear. But what do you guys think about that? Like maybe making the spec a little bit more, you know, indicative of this model and you know, this event system essentially, right?
Yeah, I think that would be good. There is, I've been glancing at the spec little in the background here. There is a small chapter in the primer called basically why we don't want to have point-to-point communication. But I think having something earlier on, as you say, that sort of describes the intended or major use case with an event broker and that stuff would
perfect.
make it a better sell.
Yeah, definitely. And I agree. I think you know, having that section saying, you know, we don't want this to be a point-to-point should be a huge, bold, you know, in red in my opinion. But yeah, I think having that in there, because, you know, like having this as point-to-point, I think really doesn't make too much sense. And Andre, I don't know who you talk to ask for this imperative, but like I really feel like this message bus, like if you just have like a subscriber model, like would solve all the, like even the, you know, starting pipeline, you know, and like I said, they still can have their own APIs, right? Like where they can just like send, you can just start the pipeline, you know? So I really don't know if, and you know, if they want, they can you know, make their APIs look exactly like, you know, CDEvent APIs. So so I don't think we need to include the one-to-one in the spec, in my opinion. I think that actually was more confusing to me than anything.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, I'm in favor for declarative events, and then having some components that react to those and calls into the API, and you can make them as close to each other as you want, like you said. But yeah, I definitely agree with this.
Cool.
With this, Ben. So
all right, awesome. Thank you. This is awesome. I didn't even know about that. Like I said, that diagram is perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, we need to bring some diagram like that then in the spec. Maybe that's a good idea to bring it and in there. Cool. Right. We only have 7 minutes left, but maybe it's enough to talk about the next topic.
Yeah, I just added that question there. I'm not sure if it's a valid topic, but I think we brought it up as well on the SIG meeting last time or sometime. I mean, how should we do with our current POCs, and should we instead call something a reference implementation that will go along with each coming version of the spec? I mean, we need to provide some kind of proof of concept or reference implementation, I believe, together with 0.1, or we should at least aim for having something there that is up to date with the 0.1 version. So is it so that we should try to migrate one of the POCs that we have towards 0.1, or should we create some other reference implementation that, say, a simple publish subscribe utility then that could publish event and subscribe maybe through some CLI and whatever, just to have something there more than an SDK?
Yeah, I think that would make sense. I'm just worried about like reference implementation as kind of a notch higher in my mind as like POC. Like if we take the current POC and we want to make it a reference implementation, I think there's some extra work to be done to, you know, clean it up and make it.
That could be the case. So you mean that we would need some high quality on the code and the structure of it and so on to call it a reference implementation? So maybe I'm actually aiming at something else than something in between there. Or I don't know really.
But it could be something simpler, like you said, maybe just two components using the SDK, or yeah.
I mean, it doesn't need to be one of our tools. I mean, it doesn't need to be Tecton or Captain or Spinnaker or anything else, really. A tool communicating. It could be a simple CLI publisher subscriber, or something a lot simpler than actually building on top of an existing tool. If that makes sense. And it should be something simple enough and easy enough for anyone to understand the code of as well, without knowing that specific tool, if there will be one. So I mean, today, to understand the POC, you might need to understand Captain and Tecton a bit, for example.
Right. So it would be something maybe like, I don't know, using the CLI to send an event over a bus, using one SDK to receive it and see how and show how to basically construct an event in your programming language out of the event you received over the wire, and with some hello world logic, basically, but just to show the actual use of that. Yeah, I think that makes sense, and would probably be relatively straightforward to set up. I guess it wouldn't be much more than how to use this SDK from the different SDKs, but put together in a send receive kind of scenario.
Maybe we actually discussed that in the context of the SDKs, when we said what requirements do we have on the SDKs, what do they need to contain, and we talked about if they need a CLI or not, I think. So this might be in that area. Then I'm not sure if all SDKs, well, of course it would be good if all SDKs had this possibility to showcase themselves with a very simple CLI producing and consuming events.
I guess, but I'm also worried, like we discussed last time, if we have too many CLIs and it will become confusing for people which CLI to use.
Yeah, I know. So then we need to maybe state one main SDK or whatever.
I think ultimately I would like to see like all the SDKs and maybe have a CLI repo, and the CLI repo behind the scene it would probably use one of the SDKs, but then you could have the CLI published on the built for the different platforms and distributed on Cocoa, Brew, or whatever Beep or whatever system is relevant.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense.
Okay. No, so I mean, the main thing would be, I think, to have it be easily understandable for anyone. But that should be one main benefit with this implementation, I think, and something easy to demo as well, and which is easily updated for each release.
Okay, so I can create an issue, or would you like to create one, Emil?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. I won't do it today. So if you have time today, maybe you can just create the issue. I will discuss it next time.
Okay, yeah, I think we can tentatively say to have something like this in 0.1. And yeah. Okay, well, we're at time, but thanks everyone. I think we had really good discussion today. And yeah, thanks for joining and all the updates, and talk to you next time.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.